Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today it is the 15th of October and I will be going over the front lines in Kherson and around Bakhmut and on the border between Kharkiv and Luhansk. But we're going to start, of course, with Kherson. So you see, I started adding in the Russian units now because I don't just want to have the Ukrainian units. Obviously, I want to track every single unit possible on the front line. Obviously, it is more difficult to get specific information about Russian units, but I will do my best to find their locations and whatever units. So let's get into this. We actually had news of a Ukrainian attempted renewal of their counteroffensive in Kherson. And so the main spearhead of this assault was around the town Milove over here. So they were pushing from Dudachani to Milove, but also from Novohirivka, Trifonivka towards Borozhenske. And so let's look at the geography a little bit over here. So you can see that around Dudachani, it is very close to the Dnieper River, and that it is also around these tributaries that go deeper into Kherson and inland. And so you have something very similar going on in Milove over here. So around this tributary, you have a lot of tree lines and some forested areas. But besides that, it's mainly just open fields. And so the recon units, they're really trying to stay around the tree lines and sift through the plains without being spotted. So usually they're the first ones to actually go in and begin the offensive operations. And so they do that usually a few hours before the beginning of the assaults by the motorized units. And so that's probably what they did around Milove, trying to infiltrate into the tributary area and into the forested areas just north of Milove. And so they were trying to attack over here. And so you started off with an artillery barrage, obviously, from the Ukrainians. They were using HIMARS and they were just using their regular artillery. And so afterwards, you had the recon units going in and some infantry fighting vehicles and tanks that were sent into the fighting, and they crossed through the open fields and, of course, through this road over here, which passes through either a bridge or some sort of ridge. I'm not exactly sure which one it is, but either way, there was an attempted attack on Milove, and there was also an attempted attack on Borzenske. And so you had the 140th Separate Special Purpose Center. That was the unit that was involved in the recon operations in this area on the line between Vorozhenske and some of these other towns on this road over here. And so I don't know the exact size of this unit, but it is a part of the Special Purpose Center, which has about 1,000 to 2,000 troops in it. But this is just one regiment of it. And so they were responsible for a lot of the planning of the operation. In addition, you had the 60th Separate Infantry Brigade, which I'm going to try to find on here, that was also involved in the operation. And so you can see that they are operating around here. And so some of their battalions were sent over to fight and reach Borzenske. And this is because this town over here is vital to Russia's new defensive line. And so if this were to fall, then it could lead to the complete collapse of Russia's entire defensive line, and they would have to withdraw much further south towards a totally new defensive line. And so it is a very important town for Russia to keep control of. And so that's why they've held on to it very fiercely today. And so throughout the day, you had some very heavy fighting, and by noon, the Ukrainians already had withdrawn. They did also receive support, I would say, from the 17th Tank Brigade and some of their battalions. And so, at least according to Russian sources, the Ukrainians did suffer some heavy casualties. So, the pro-Russia source Slavyangrad, they say that there were 120 Ukrainian kills and 15 armored vehicles destroyed and 4 T-64 tanks destroyed. And so, by noon, they withdrew to the previous lines. There was also apparently some sort of Ukrainian operation in the direction of Davydiv Breed and Kostromka, but there were no real specifics about what occurred over there, and it seems like even if there was, it was not successful by any means. And so the line is still the same at the moment. but this does indicate that Ukraine does want to continue their offensive operations in Kherson. They do have a window of time before, say, reinforcements come or before Rasputitsa sets in on these open fields, and it is harder to move around armored vehicles. And so they want to conduct these offensives as soon as possible, which is why we're seeing a lot of these assaults right now. The Russian units over here, such as the 126th Coastal Defense Brigade, the 83rd Guards Air Assault Brigade, and also the 76th Guards Air Assault Brigade, which is located right over here. They are mainly responsible for holding this line. There was some reinforcements that were sent in since the previous Ukrainian offensive, and so they were able to hold the line as a result. You can see now that the line is much shorter. Like, I'm going to measure right now. It's about 37 miles. And so that's much shorter than it was before. And so they can hold this line even if they're numerically inferior, which I don't even know if that's true, but it is possible because of either heavy losses or a lack of manpower, although now that's going to be ameliorated. And so they can hold this line, and they've proven that they can in this round of fighting. Another important thing to mention is that Russia does have the artillery advantage in this sector, so they were able to pound a lot of Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicles and tanks as they were advancing, and also spot a lot of the recon groups as they advanced, and so that helped a lot. In addition, the Russians, they did use their Su-24 and Su-35 bombers in order to destroy a lot of anti-air Ukrainian positions. They also used Shahed 136s and Shahed 131s and Lancet drones, and those were used on a lot of Ukraine's anti-air missile defense systems. And so that was a part of incapacitating Ukraine's offensive capabilities and defensive capabilities as the offensive began. And so that was all a part of why this breakthrough did not work, although I do expect much more of this to occur in the future. Now let's move on to the Bakhmut front, where I did add in just the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, but I do need to add in a bunch of more units, both from the Russian side and from the Ukrainian side. So before I get into it, I want to look at some of the geography over here. So you can see that there is a very important road that goes through Bakhmut. It goes through the Bakhmutovka River, crosses through Opitny into Odradivka, Mykolаivka, Druha, and then it goes around Ozaryanivka and Zaitsev. And so this is a very important road because it is of relatively low elevation. And so if you control the heights around it, you could really just dominate a lot of the towns around here. And so that's why you're still seeing fighting around Jovanka over here. You do have Ukrainians still situated in the forested areas where they are holding up and putting a lot of resistance on the Russians. They are also holding positions around Mayorsk, which is a key train station. Obviously, the train station is not working now, but because it is an urban type settlement, it is actually pretty dense, and so it's difficult to overrun the defensive fortifications that were sent up over here. Over here in Kordyumivka, you have a lot of quarries, and you can see that it is a key logistical hub, or at least it used to be before it got so close to the front line. There are some roads that it connects to. So, for instance, it connects to this important road which reaches Ivanivske, which is important with connecting, say, big cities like Chasiv Yar or Kostiantynivka to Bakhmut. There's also another smaller road over here which connects Kordyumivka to Klishchivka and Andriivka. And so that's all important for setting up a defensive line and coordinating all of the different units in this area. Also, you can look at the heights around the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut, and there is a lot of good positions for shelling over here, specifically in these hilly areas over here, which Russia did take over in recent days. And so this will be utilized as a means by which to strike the Ukrainian positions in Bakhmut. And in recent days, you have seen a lot of increased strikes by Russian artillery on Bakhmut. Even the train station, which is located over here, this was also targeted in Russian shelling But Ukraine, they also do have good positions for shelling Russian forces because of the high ground around Chasiv Yar. So this entire area is at a much higher elevation compared to Bakhmut. Bakhmut city itself is actually relatively low in elevation, and so any Russian forces entering into here could potentially be exposed to Ukrainian shelling if Ukraine were to focus on that and were to establish some sort of superiority in artillery. But now let's go to what actually happened on the front line. And so there were a few minor changes, but not much since I last recorded my video. So, they're still fighting around the clay deposit with the 93rd Brigade, the 93rd Ukrainian Mechanized Brigade. And so they're fighting still around the asphalt factory and garbage dump. So they're holding the line over here. About half of Patricia Lumumbi Street is under Wagner control. So now you have several battalions of the 93rd Brigade situated at this art winery, and there's also like a furniture factory. I'm pretty sure this is the furniture factory, but I may be mistaken. And so this is their new positions after they withdrew from some areas. You see all of these different like different reservoirs and minor houses around here. I think they're called dachas, which are like these sort of reserves or like secondary homes. At least they were in Soviet times. And so that's really what makes up most of the eastern part of Patricia Lumumbi Street. So it is less dense, but as you go deeper into the city, it becomes more and more dense. And so now the Wagner Group, they have extended their control, and they do have control of this gas station over here. They have control of some houses, and so they really need to just pass through these forested areas before actually reaching some key residential blocks. And so all this residential area could be taken, but it would be in fierce urban combat before actually reaching the Bakhmutovka River over here and the important road, which is the Bakhmut road. Now let's move on to southern Bakhmut, where there is still fighting around Ivanhrad. The situation is still unclear because Ukrainian sources actually allege that Wagner did take over Ivanhrad for a certain period of time, but that the Ukrainians were able to launch a counteroffensive under the 58th Motorized Brigade, and so we don't exactly know what's going on over here. But the General Staff of Ukraine did claim to repel assaults around Ivanhrad, Opitny, and into towns like Kordiumivka or Zaryanivka. You do have a lot of fortified positions of the AFU in southern Opitny and throughout the town. There's a soccer field and this minor water storage area in between Ivanhrad and Opitny. So if the Wagner Group is still in Ivanhrad, which is possible, this is what the Russian sources say, then they would have to cross through this open area and they would be exposed to machine gun fire from Ukrainian positions, which are all around these roads over here. And so that would be very dangerous for the Wagner Group troops in this area. Due to the heavy fighting in this area and a lot of the casualties sustained by both sides, but specifically Ukraine in this instance, the 115th Territorial Defense Brigade has been used to sort of like replenish the forces of the Ukrainians in this area. So obviously they're not the best like trained, juxtaposed to say the 93rd Brigade, which is an elite unit in the AFU, but you're going to see a lot of these territorial defense units. There's another one that I know of, the 118th Territorial Defense Brigade, which is being moved in to sort of hold the line at Bakhmut for as long as possible while you have these other Ukrainian operations going on. But while all of that is going on, you still do have reported attacks in the direction of Yakovlivka, Bilohorivka, and Berestove, according to the Ukrainian military. But now let's move on to the Luhansk front, where there is some news from this area. The Ukrainians, they are reporting on some potential Russian assaults in the direction of Terny and also in this town Novosadove. And so whenever Ukraine reports this, it does imply that there is fighting in the region, which is why I have the map so close to the two towns, but there's really no way to know whether or not Russia is present in this area. It seems as if the fighting is very fierce, though. And so let's look at some of the geography around here. Again, a lot of this eastern area is very forested, but once you get past that, there's just one single road over here and a lot of just open terrain and open fields for tanks and armored fighting vehicles, and so it is a good place for these sort of engagements. But looking further up, it seems as if the Russians have sort of withdrawn towards this line around the Zherebets River, and this would explain why they're trying to assault towns such as Terni, which is on the eastern side of the Zherebets River, in order to hold the line for as much as possible. And so that's why you're seeing them sort of like leave some of these important towns like Tver, Libove, which they had previously occupied, but now they have left the area. And the same could be said about Nadia. These were two towns that I had previously marked as red, but now they're blue. And so the new Russian line is centered around Serhivka, and of course, more importantly, around this road over here, which starts around Novovodiane and ends at Kovalivka. And you see a lot of the time that Russia really bases their defensive lines based off of roads and different rivers. And so the Zherebets River is around here. That's why they prefer this line. But they have a backup line around Svatove. And so in this area in between, there is pretty high elevation. And so this is the only place where Russia can get some artillery in order to shell the Ukrainian positions, because it's more difficult to do that in places like Svatove or directly on the front line. And so you can see a lot of concentration of Russian artillery along this highway over here. Now let's go a bit to the north, and I want to emphasize the importance of this town over here. It's called Nizhnya Duvanka, and so you can see how a lot of roads sort of branch off around this town, going either to the southeast or the southwest or to the north. And then you have a bunch of tributaries too that are branching off from, say, the Kobilka River over here, or from the Krasna River. You can see, and so this is a very important town, and it would give Ukraine some sort of positions to the north of Svatove to flank the Russian forces in here, because there is a large garrison of Russian forces in this area if they were able to break through. So that's why you're seeing the Ukrainians, and specifically the 14th Brigade and the 92nd Brigades, sort of pushing in the direction of Kislivka. And some maps actually show that the Ukrainians are much closer to the town, and that they are actually fighting in there. I did previously talk about how Ukrainian forces had actually entered the town but were pushed back. And so you can see that now Russia's trying to establish this line along this road, which is something that they always do. So now you can see that it's around Orleanske and also Yahidny and Kotlyarivka. And so they're basically setting up this new defensive line over here, which spans across to Tabaivka. I would say by now, Pischane is already under Ukraine's control, and so I will change that to blue. But moving on, you can see now that the Ukrainians stationed up here north around Dvorichny have basically linked up with the main Ukrainian grouping of, say, Kraken Battalion and the 92nd Mechanized Brigade and some of the battalions in the 14th Brigade. Through Liman Parashi, you really don't have that many Russian forces in this area. They were able to maintain their positions in Tavilzhanka, but they have withdrawn from Vilshana, and so they're still holding on to Tokarivka, so I don't think that they're going to withdraw from the Oskil River over here to the north just yet, especially given the fact that they want to maintain a distance between the front line and the key city of Troitske, because if Ukraine actually invests a lot of resources into taking Troitske right now instead of Svatove, that would prove in the long run to be a better strategy, because you can see how reaching this entire area would really cut off a lot of the supplies from the groupings just to the south. There would be no more reinforcements coming in, it would be much less efficient and there would be less resupplies. And so it is a sort of thing that could be done and would be pretty unexpected by the Russian command that is focusing most of their resources right now on Svatove. And so we're going to have to see what comes of that. Last thing before I end the video is that there's been a lot of news of different countries actually warning their citizens to leave Ukraine. And this is a very urgent message, very similar to what happened at the beginning of the invasion in February, February 24th. And so you actually have America, China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Serbia, and various other countries that I don't have listed over here telling their citizens to leave Ukraine as soon as possible. And then you even have Kazakhstan closing its embassy in Kiev. And so this is a very interesting sign, and it does indicate some sort of escalation. And so everyone's really looking towards the Russian buildup around the Belarusian city of Gomel and further to the west into places like Mazhir, Pinsk, and Brest over here. You can't really see it on the map. But for the most part, you do have a lot of Russian equipment situated in Gomel. And the fear is that Russia would sort of cross the border over here again and attack Chernihiv or cross through the forested areas through Chernobyl again, Ivankiv, Irpin, Kiev. Again, I really don't think this will happen anytime soon, but I do think that the Russian buildup in this area is important to look at because it seems as if it's a distraction from whatever operations they're planning on the actual front line. And so it's really a way to just like tie up a lot of Ukraine's reservists because you do have a very huge chunk of Ukrainian forces situated along the border with Belarus, which is a very, very long border. I don't want to like get an exact number, but just know that it's about like 350 miles long and it could be even more. And so you have a lot of territorial defense units that are stationed in this area. And think of it like this: if there was no threat of an invasion from Belarus, then many of those troops could have been freed up to be sent to other parts of the front line. And so you want to keep as many of them tied up in the north as possible while you're conducting whatever offensive operations you have planned or even defensive operations at the moment in the actual sectors of fighting. And so that's all I have for today. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.